Well, good morning, everybody, or good, I guess, lunchtime if you happen to be on the East Coast or anywhere else in the world. I hope the day is ending up being really, really good for you. This is Scott Morrison. I'm the Distinguished Engineer from CA Technologies. I'm also the former CTO of Layer 7, so you may know me from my previous life. And listen, today we've got a great webinar for you. It's myself and my colleague, Leif Bildoy. Now, I'm broadcasting this morning. It's a cold day in Vancouver. It's looking like it's going to be really nice later on today. We've had a run of really nice, crisp, cold fall weather. But Leif is coming from halfway around the world. He's in Lisbon, Portugal right now. So he's sitting down to dinner while I'm drinking my first coffee. And Leif, of course, is the product manager responsible for all of our mobile initiatives here at CA Technologies in Vancouver. But what really makes today special, and what I'm really excited about, is we have a special guest on this this webinar, and I'm really happy to actually welcome Bob Covington, who's Director Enterprise Architecture at the J.M. Smucker Corporation. Now, a lot of you probably know Smuckers as the jam people, and in fact, when I was growing up, you couldn't get Smuckers up here in Vancouver, or probably anywhere else in Canada. We used to actually drive down across the line over to Bellingham, which is a little town, well, actually a small city, we'll call it, not too far from Vancouver, and load up on things like that and old El Paso tamales and all sorts of things we couldn't buy up here in Canada. Now, of course, Smuckers is a huge global concern and has been growing through mergers and acquisitions over many years, and is a lot more than jam. Of course, they own companies like Folgers, they own companies like Crisco and Pillsbury as well. So that makes things difficult for Bob, because of course Bob, as the head of enterprise architecture, has to worry about integration, bringing all of these different, disparate, consumer packaged goods together from a technical perspective. So he's got a tough job, and so he's going to tell us a little about, some of his experiences and in particular what he's doing around APIs and mobility and such. So listen, again, welcome everybody. So today we're really going to be talking about the multi-device universe, because more and more what we're finding is it's not just about the laptop you're sitting in front of right now or the desktop or anything like that. And it's not even about the tablet or the mobile phone or anything like that. It's actually about all sorts of different devices, which can go from your car to the thermostat on your wall to any device that you're actually interacting with. This, of course, is the becoming fabled Internet of Things, and we're very interested at it here at Layer 7 and CA in general. And we're doing a lot of very interesting work these days. Some of you may have seen it down at CA World last week in Las Vegas. We're actually starting to integrate APIs and security and also things, whether it's a door, whether it's a drone flying around, or just about anything else. So lots of exciting stuff going on, and it's something that we're very excited about these days. So the best way to talk about the Internet of Things and the multi-device universe is to talk about, the one thing that's probably changed our lives more than anything, and that's mobility. So think about this for a moment. How far away is your phone? Probably not very far. Like, you can probably actually just reach out and grab it right now. And this has become more than anything kind of the key to our modern lives. This is how we conduct our lives. It's how we run our social networks. And it's how we keep in touch with our friends, our family, but also what's going on in, our professional lives. So it's a tremendously important, tremendously transformational kind of technology. And more than anything else, the big revolution we've seen on mobile devices like phones has been the move towards apps. When mobile devices first came out, we were convinced that it was just going to be yet another channel for the regular web, and we would just shrink everything down. And if you look at the history of mobility from, I guess the early 2000s, we had things like WAP, the Wireless Access Protocol, which was an attempt to actually do, quite literally, web browsing out to small, very resource-constrained devices. And you know what? I was there. I worked in some of that stuff. It wasn't a great experience. And even when we got richer browsers and much more powerful systems, 6 years ago or so, when the first iPhone came out and all the other phones that have followed it, we still found that the browsing experience just wasn't quite what we wanted in that. And so apps ended up running, I think taking the day. They ended up being the thing that we integrate with better than anything else, and I think we identify with. So this has become a huge explosion, a whole new area, I think, in computing that that's spawned off, countless different interesting startups and quite literally has created careers for many of us in this industry. So when you look at the actual breakdown of apps versus, the mobile experience with mobile browsers, it's actually kind of shocking. Apps won so much that, when you actually do a survey of this, it's coming out something like 82% of people would, usually rather interact with apps than with browsers themselves. And that's going right across a number of different devices, which means all of a sudden we've got that problem of dealing with native devices and native peculiarities on every different operating system and every different form factor and things like that, which is much more exasperated in the app world, even than it is in the browser world, where it's already pretty bad. But in the middle here, if you look at the middle number, this is one that really excites me, because every one of those apps is really generally being driven by APIs somewhere. Because the way we integrate systems together, application to application communications, whether it's the app on your phone talking to, some server back in the enterprise, it's going to be using APIs. And our job really at CA Technologies is to make sure that you've got the tools to be able to do that safely and securely. So the big question that you've got to ask yourself, right away is what are you going to do if you have to build some kind of user experience on a phone? Are you going to, basically go down that road of building, a rich client, a rich app, or just try to actually adapt and try to go with, what you're used to in terms of the, the HTML experience, and just try to do a browser-based app? And the truth is, while apps won hands down, there's still good reasons in a lot of cases to actually build, a classic rich HTML5 style app, because you can basically tap into a much, much greater range of talent out there. There's lots of people that know those technologies. And I think the one thing that we're seeing a lot of these days, and what really excites me, is the hybrid case, which is what lives kind of right in the middle here. It's not a pure, regular web app that, has been built, to serve up from a server and do page-by-page transitions within a regular browser like Safari or something like that. But instead, it's based, essentially composed on those same technologies of HTML5 and CSS3 and JavaScript, but all packaged together in a very thin frame. And so it operates much, much more like a regular app. And if well designed, these can basically give you exactly the same user experience as an average app that you might write natively, but can actually transfer from device to device much easier. So we're big fans of that. A lot of the pioneering work on that was done actually not very far from where we are right here in Vancouver. The reason it's called Cordova, or at least the open source version of all that is called Cordova, is that's a street very close to where the old Matobi offices were here in Vancouver. So it's something we're proud of in the local tech scene here, and the guys that did that did a very, very good job. So interesting cases and interesting discussions and things you've got to do early on. And once you've decided the architecture of your app and essentially the tools that you're going to use to build it, the next big challenge that you're faced with all the time is the problem of authentication and authorization. And we sort of see a graph of password frustration happening here, because although in computing and in particular on the web, we've got all sorts of different ways of identifying people that go far beyond the simple username and password, it really is our default. And the minute we take that down to a much more resource-constrained device, even something as powerful as a tablet, we still fall to that. And it's not a great user experience in general. And this is something that's sort of come to a tipping point these days in mobility. So more and more we're starting to see a growth in other kinds of factors of identification, particularly when stuff matters a lot, when money is being spent or you're accessing critical records. And this is where things like fingerprints and such become so important in modern computing. And so we've been very, very excited these days within our team here when Apple was quickly came out with the fingerprint reader on the iPhones since it's moved on to the tablets. And we're seeing similar things in the whole Android world as well, because we can begin to get easy biometrics into the system. And anybody who's gone in and fiddled around with some of the code for actually accessing this stuff has found it's actually pretty good and it's surprisingly stable. The big challenge, of course, though, is the binding of that thing that you are, that fingerprint, and the actual identity you're trying to associate it with on some remote server, which generally is something like, well, it could be anything. It could be your Facebook ID. It could be, the ID that you're using to get access to, back-end servers or something like that. And that's actually a continued challenge, and one that we actually spend an awful lot of time thinking about. Because in the end, good security is simple. Good security is great for people and works for people. And so if we do our job right here at CA, we can give you a lot of the technology that lets you drop in capabilities that really give you some of this advanced security without having to burden your developers too much with, arcane programming methods or, difficult back and forth negotiations with servers. And instead just let you begin to overlay a good security model onto existing technologies that you're developing and give your users a great user experience, one that doesn't burden them too much. So it can be a real win-win there. So to kind of go into that and talk about that a little more, let's look at a very, very typical scenario that we see all the time here at CA. And this is the case where you've got some kinds of back-end systems, and they could be HR systems or databases or mainframes, or they could even be like, modern, big data systems like Hadoop or something like that. And you're trying to make all of that available to the outside world. So you're trying to make it available to mobile devices or even connected devices like connected car or any other kind of Internet of Things. And of course, the main integration point here, that main interface is the modern web API, the RESTful method that was so well articulated by Roy Fielding in his thesis, 15, almost 20 years ago now. It's not that new a technology anymore. But of course, it is the one that won. It is the way we're doing this kind of integration now. And it just makes sense, especially for things like mobile devices. So if you look at a system like this, the first thing that sort of pops into your mind is, how do I deal with single sign-on? Like, how do I deal with the fact that I don't want to burden my users who are trying to get access to all of these different, data sources in my enterprise? I don't want to burden them with having to sign on to every single one of those, because that's just not going to happen. Like, that's just not a great experience. And this level of single sign-on is something that we know an awful lot about. We've been doing this for years. This is the problem that technologies like SAML did such a good job of solving in the conventional web world on your desktop and things like that. But that didn't translate really, really well into the modern, mobile world. And it didn't for a few reasons. One of them is that it's extremely focused on kind of internal server-side configuration and server-side management of entitlements, as opposed to starting to push that out to the actual users themselves and let them decide how to do things like tie accounts together. So the real genius, I think, of some of the newer technologies that are starting to deal with the combination of this problem, the combination of OAuth and OpenID Connect, have been that they sort of shift the power base from being, a few people clustered around the directory and identity and access system, sort of cabal of managers who decides who gets access to what, and instead start to push that out to the users themselves and actually empower the users themselves to begin to tie together the things that they already own. And that was the real genius of technologies like OAuth. And things like OpenID Connect, which is coming on very, very fast, is the other piece that we need to start to do true federation and true single sign-on between different back-end servers. So that's all fine and good, and that's something that's evolving fast, and we're seeing a lot of use for that. But what if we begin to expand our scope of what it means to be doing single sign-on? What if single sign-on isn't just signing on to a bunch of back-end servers, which is what we did in the web days? What if single sign-on was signing on across a whole bunch of different apps, like all these different apps that are on my screen right now? What if I could cherry pick a few of those and put them into kind of a grouping that said, when I sign on to one of these apps, I've actually signed on to all of them, and they can actually share tokens between each other. Now, anybody who's done any work on iOS or Android realizes that sharing information between applications is actually really, really hard. And the reason it's so hard is that the operating system is designed to actually discourage that kind of thing for security reasons. The operating system actually silos applications into their own space, because if you do that, if one app goes bad, if one app for some reason is actually a Trojan horse, or if one app, is compromised in a way, it can't actually start to spread that poison to all the other apps on the device. Now contrast that with your laptop. Contrast that with, the regular desktop operating system you use. You don't really get that. You get apps that, if they go bad, if you lose the keys to the kingdom, can actually really infiltrate everything pretty much. And these ideas were actually pioneered through, technologies like SE Linux and that. So they actually were pioneered on the server side. But the genius, I think, of what was done on the phones was to take those same concepts and create that highly constrained, highly siloed operating system model on the phones. And now, 6, 7 years later, we're in a world where, despite the fact that there's all sorts of, new threats and viruses and things like that coming out, the phones have been, largely pretty stable. And they have because they were well designed from the beginning. It's not perfect by any means. No security is ever perfect. And it's always evolving, and it's always, trying to keep up with new threats and things like that. But hats off to the people who designed this in the first place, because they did a damn good job the first time around. Now, the problem is that makes our lives a little more difficult if we're trying to do something like single sign-on across applications. And so one of the things that we did at CA that we're very excited about is that we actually created a number of libraries. We call it our mobile SDK for both Android and iOS that basically take the burden away from the developer of having to worry about the whole dance with back-end authorization systems. It sort of encapsulates away all of this OAuth back and forth and OpenID Connect and things like that. It deals with the pop-ups for authentication, so it gives you a modal widget that lets you sign on with a username and a password or do social sign-on and that, and all that's great. But you know what the really cool thing it does? It also lets you begin to share sessions between different applications. So look up here on the left where I've got an Android phone, a Samsung phone, and I've got 4 likely similarly colored apps, and those could be any apps. One could be an HR app, the other one could be access to a sales database, a third one could be a travel information application or what have you. And they're all united basically as apps that my company has given to me. Okay, so they're corporate enterprise apps that have been pushed out there. Now, all of those apps can be united into kind of a single virtual security domain, and in such a way that they can begin using our technology to actually share in that single sign-on session, which is really cool because, again, there's a silo between every one of those apps, so they can't really share very much information. But using our SDK, you can actually share, that sign-on and propagate it across just those apps. Now, it doesn't go past those apps. So if you have an app that's a personal app, like Angry Birds or something like that, it can't share in that, so it can't get access to those tokens. Now, it may sound like I'm talking about an MDM system and I'm going to put all this heavyweight crap on your phone that you may not like, but I'm not. I'm actually talking about just simple SDK that actually goes into the app itself. It's compiled in as part of the code, and it can be distributed wherever you want. And the only limitation I'm going to put on it, it's not really a limitation at all, I would call it a feature, is that as long as the apps are all signed under the same corporate developer key, whether it's whatever your company is, Smuckers, whether it's CA, whether it's whatever company you work for, those are the apps that are united under this kind of virtual whole. So it's a very, very lightweight way of actually, connecting into remote systems, and it's very, very good, especially if you're beginning to build out, let's say, mass distribution of apps that you don't want to actually put, a lot of burden on the user of having to, put, heavyweight management technology on it. So very cool stuff here. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Bob for a few minutes from the J.M. Smucker Corporation, and let him talk about some of the interesting use cases that he comes across as an enterprise architect, and some of their experiences with CA Technologies API solutions. So take it away, Bob.
Thanks, Scott. I think a lot of the challenges that you described are definitely ones that we have had to deal with here at the J.M. Smucker Company. I think like a lot of organizations, you have corporate information that is vital for the operation of your business. And the ability of having mobile devices is now allowing for a whole new level of productivity through having information available anytime, any place, anywhere. The challenge is, how do you do that in a secure way? How do you do that in a way that allows you to leverage them and maximize the assets that you have internally in your environment and make them available through not just a handheld device, but really any device that our employees need to be able to use? One of the other challenges that we had to kind of contend with is that in our case, we have quite a few custom applications, but we also have a lot of commercial off-the-shelf software. So in many cases, we can't necessarily compile or change the code. We have to kind of live with what they have provided with us. And one of the things that we've just really enjoyed is having the flexibility that the Layer 7 or the API gateway provides to us in allowing us not only to provide a whole new level of interaction between applications and through APIs, but also to enable us to transform and be able to take whatever we're given from the application and the whatever rudimentary APIs are provided to that and transform it into modern protocols like a REST protocol, et cetera, that we can leverage in terms of both our native mobile applications as well as web apps that we also leverage. So if you could advance to the next slide here. One of the primary use cases that we had for our Layer 7 was enabling secure access to our corporate information, and to try to do so in a way that would not require any users to enter in 25 different passwords along the way. I think this is one of the challenges you have. How do you maintain security, and yet how do you also make this easy to use? How do I simplify the life, and as Google principles try to put out? And so in our particular case, we leveraged really a trio of 3 different technologies to kind of pull together a solution that has really been very productive for our end users. The first is on our mobile devices, we have a mobile device management solution, and we have pushed to every device a unique certificate. So that certificate is used as one factor of the authentication that we leverage to make sure that the device is a approved device and one that has not been tampered with, et cetera. That certificate is then used in coordination with our VPN software that is on there to enable the second factor of our authentication, which is the username and password. Now, in our particular case, we actually embed the username and password in the key store of the particular device, and that is unlocked in the case of some of the more modern devices with a fingerprint reader or some biometric reader, or in the older devices entering in a 6+ digit code. So with a combination of the certificate and a username and password, which is embedded in the system, unlocked with some form of a user entered or a fingerprint or biometric feed, then the VPN will automatically connect, and whenever I am accessing some type of corporate data in the system. The third component, though, is really the one we're most excited about, and that is now once I am into this mobile DMZ, so to speak, this area where I can now get access to something, we now have that completely protected with our Layer 7 or API gateway. And this provides basically the ability for us to take a application that is behind the scenes, whether it's one of our legacy e-business suite applications, whether it's a modern application we just developed, or even a data source, and expose this as a REST service that I can now consume with a native application that exists on the device, or I can leverage through a proxy capability HTML applications flowing through the Layer 7, taking advantage of all of its ability to look for malformed packets, all of its protection capabilities, etc. But one of the more exciting things then is that we then have our Layer 7 integrate with Active Directory. And through that integration, we're able to now leverage a single sign-on login capability with the applications behind the scenes. So as transactions are going through the Layer 7, it automatically knows who my user context is based on the VPN profile coming in, and then passing that authentication context through the username that's stored in the key store to the applications that are then behind the scenes. This has allowed us basically to allow an end user to take a mobile device and stick their finger on it. In the case of my my iPhone, as an example, I can bring up an application that is inside of our internal firewall, and as soon as they click on that application, the VPN automatically connects. It establishes a connection to the Layer 7, which then pulls information from our back-end systems. All of this happening in a matter of seconds. And the great thing is that, from an end user perspective, they don't know any of this stuff is happening, but yet I now have many, many, many levels of security that are now being added to this to allow me to have secure access to each of my environments. We also leverage that same API gateway for a number of other elements. One, for us to leverage SAML authentication in the event that that application is a cloud-based application, and we need to pass the security context from an internal application into a cloud-based application, and leveraging SAML, and that's worked very well for us over the last year or so. In addition, we leverage the API gateway to allow us to take native applications and kind of reform some of the APIs to allow us to take things that maybe were never really designed for working with a mobile device, and in our case old PL SQL code that we developed behind the scenes to kind of run our company, and expose that as a RESTful API service that I can now consume and leverage over a relatively noisy WAN-based connection. So all of these capabilities allow us to really enable a new level of agility and a new level of capability to our end users, and allow us to not only deal with this relatively difficult way of getting corporate information out to a mobile device, but also help us to do that with applications, commercial off-the-shelf software that, quite frankly, I can't get into it. I don't have the source code, right? I can't necessarily change them, and so being able to have this tool that can kind of wrap around it and allow me to modify it and change it, live there's just been a phenomenal resource for us. If you take a look at just from an infrastructure perspective, we have, in our case, we have implemented the API gateway. We're on version 7.1. We're about to do our version 8 upgrade. But one of the great things is that we've been able to leverage that same infrastructure not only for this communication that I just talked to you about of having a mobile access VPN and then leveraging that into our high availability API gateway, but we also now have external APIs that we're now offering to third parties that are now leveraging interaction with our internal systems in a secure way. And so having the ability of not just this any place, anytime, anywhere, not just being the device that you're talking about, it's also exposing that and bringing that out to a whole nother level of interaction with our customers and with our partners, which has been pretty fantastic. So we've been, we're very excited about some of the things that are coming down the line with this, and in particular, the mobile SDK with its session sharing, because today that's something that we really don't have a really good solution for being able to take an application context from one application to another to allow kind of that seamless integration between sessions. So that's something we'll definitely be looking forward to implementing here as that comes out. So Scott, I don't know if you have any questions or any comments on what we put together here.
No, this is great. No, you know what, Bob, what I like the most about what you did here is you've achieved an incredibly high level of security for your the people that work for you. But at the same time, there's not a tremendous burden on the users. The comments that you made that it all just happens in seconds and people don't realize, even what's going on underneath the hood and how sophisticated it is, I think, sort of says it all. And that's exactly what we want to achieve for our users, which is we need, as sort of technical leaders, we need to be able to provide that great user experience, but at the same time, never compromise, fundamentally what our security model is going to be. So, yeah, very exciting. I'm very impressed with what you guys have done. Good. So listen, let's from here, and again, thank you, Bob. That was really, really interesting. Let me talk about some futures, and what I'm going to do is show you a little, glimpse into what we were showing last week at CA World. So this isn't, quite ready for prime time or anything like that. These are things we're experimenting with, but they're also showing kind of the roadmap of where we're going with other devices, and where I think some of the challenges are in terms of authentication and authorization. And how that's going to map into the multi-device universe. So number one, how do we deal with this whole problem of quite literally moving a session from one device to another? So we started with the basic idea of single sign-on between back-end servers, and that's something that I think is very stable. We understand that in this industry now, and we're beginning to understand the concept of moving sessions between applications on a single, in the context of a single device, and our mobile SDK does exactly that. But what happens when you start to pop from one device to another? And of course, the phone manufacturers, And device manufacturers out there are interested in this as well, and you know, many of them are beginning to demonstrate things. Apple has its continuity. Samsung has something called Flow. We became very interested, though, more in the applications context. I think, you know, Bob hit it earlier on when he was saying that, you know, the importance of that application session is something that you know, very often is you know, is something that doesn't get captured in many solutions. And so we really set out to say, how could we make that application context move from one device to another, and even cross vendors? And that's what we started to experiment with. And in fact, we showed a great example of this going from an iPhone to a Samsung device, where we're actually using Bluetooth Low Energy between the two devices as a means of understanding when they're in proximity to each other. So, and it's kind of a neat application where I'm working on that phone marked source on the left of the screen, and I'm just in a notepad style application. So I'm, you know, writing a little memo, got to call Bob and, you know, talk to him more about some of the interesting things they're doing at Champ Smuckers these days. And I get into the proximity of my tablet. And what happens is the Bluetooth Low Energy system actually basically is exactly what it says it is. It is an extension of Bluetooth, but the key is it can be running kind of all the time without consuming a tremendous amount of power. Now, if that doesn't sound like that big a deal, it really is. I just replaced the batteries not, you know, 5 minutes before this this webinar on my Bluetooth mouse. And I do that probably once every 2 to 3 weeks. It's nuts. Conventional Bluetooth uses an awful lot of power. Bluetooth Low Energy, in contrast, basically, you know, hardly uses any at all. And it can be embedded very easily into a very, very small device. And that's what Apple's iBeacon concept is. It's a profile of Bluetooth Low Energy that can easily be put into, you know, a tiny little device that you can stick onto something. There's various companies out there that are doing this. But it can also, that same signal can come out of your handset or your laptop or something like that. And within the operating system as well, there's actually hooks for callbacks, so that when you basically come into proximity and when you hit a certain threshold, when you're fairly, you know, at a certain distance, and it's not perfect obviously, but it's pretty good. When you get to be within a certain distance of a system, you know, it's essentially emitting Bluetooth Low Energy, it can actually create a callback within the OS that actually will do things like call back to an application that's in the background and essentially fire it up and tell it, hey, you're within a region of you know, that you're listening for now, and do something about it. And so we're starting to use this kind of thing to do a secure negotiation between the two devices, so that a session can be handed off from one device where I'm, you know, taking a note, and I have a remote session on, let's say, my CA username and password remotely, and I actually get close to that target, and what happens is a little application will fire up and say, hey, I know you're in the middle of something, but if you want to actually transfer to this other device, just give me a thumbprint to prove that it's still you and you haven't dropped your device or anything like that. And the negotiation then essentially does two things. It takes the active session that I've got with my remote system and moves that session over to the target device. So moves it over to the tablet here. But it also flushes the context that I'm working on in my current application. There's a callback, you know, within the SDK that basically says, okay, everything you're doing right now, bundle it all up, push it back to our mobile application gateway, which is the mag that's sitting right out there in the cloud. Push it all out to here so it can then be picked up under a common session ID that now lives over on another system. And then it shuts down everything on that system, and I walk over and I pick up my tablet and I continue exactly where I left off. So where I started my note and said, you know, discuss Q4 targets with Bob, don't forget to, and then I pick it up on the target machine, cover and sentence. I finish my note right there. And in fact, what we were demonstrating at CA World even essentially allowed us to push the text into different apps. So you could push it into a notepad app or actually push it into an email message. So it's almost like a virtual copy and paste across devices. So really cool stuff. And we really believe this kind of thing is the future. This is where technology is going to end up going, because we're going to interact with all sorts of devices in the multi-device universe. It's not just going to be a phone to a tablet. It's going to be a phone talking to a bus shelter that I walk by that happens to have a screen on it. It's in a public place, and so I begin an automatic negotiation with that, sort of essentially setting my rules of engagement with that. Like, what am I willing to share with that bus shelter in a very public place? I may be willing to share my Twitter ID because I'd love to see the tweets that have come out, against my name or something like that, because I'm a, you're a complete egomaniac and you want to see what's going on in the social network about you. Or it might be something as simple as I want to see the current stock ticker for CA Technologies and see how we're doing these days. Stuff that I wouldn't mind sharing publicly because it's already effectively public information. But in contrast, I may then walk into one of my offices and walk into a common meeting room, close the door, and walk up to a screen, and then basically move my current session from my device, my phone, up to that screen and begin interacting with that screen in stuff that's of a more higher security nature. So in other words, actual corporate interactions and things like that. I may be, actually going in and looking at sales projections and things like that. So very different environment, very different, sort of rules of engagement with different devices. And this is exactly the direction we're going in right now, and we're kind of deeply interested in. So the other part of that thing is how do we make our phones the actual key to actually get access to things? And it turns out that we can use many of exactly the same technologies and exactly the same concepts. And again, at CA World, we actually showed kind of a neat demonstration where we actually had a door, but it was a very small door. It was about, it was like a door for a garden gnome or something like that. It was about a foot tall. And but it actually had an electronic lock on it and a regular-sized door handle and everything. But it was linked into a Raspberry Pi, and there was actually a secure Zigbee mesh network as part of this whole thing, because one of the things we were trying to do was say, what if you had a home controller, a home control system, which, as you got close to your home, you could begin to interact with between your phone and the home controller, and start to negotiate, certain things like turn on my lights and quietly bring up the music because I'm about to walk into the house, and start to unlock doors as I get very close to them. And so this one was interesting because it was a combination both of Apple's iBeacon. We actually used a third-party company that built small embeddable iBeacons that were associated with the door. And so as I got very close to the door, the session negotiation began between my phone and my home controller and my back-end identity store, which happened to be a corporate identity store at that point. And in the session, essentially moved over to my home, because that was going to be my home, my base at that point. And the home controller could then send a signal out to the door over the Zigbee mesh network that said, open the electronic lock. And so we actually showed this again, using fingerprints as a way of levering the whole thing and kicking off the whole thing. And you know what, I got to tell you, demos, you know what it's like. You build demos and you show them off, and something will always go wrong. I never show demos live on stage or in webinars because they always blow up in my face. This thing was rock solid. I couldn't believe it. It just seemed to work every time. So anyway, it's not, it's in some ways it's following technology that I think is going to become ubiquitous in the near future. In fact, you can go to Home Depot today and you can go to buy a Kivo lock, and it uses regular Bluetooth and everything like that. And people might say, well, what's different about that? And I'll tell you what's different about that is that's a silo. That's an identity silo you've created, and we're all about breaking silos down and integrating all the identities that you've got all over the internet, your corporate identities, your social identities, your personal identities, and using those to be the key to your life. And using interactions between those and passing off from one identity to the other, to the other, to the other, and tying those things together so that you can begin to create, a seamless experience between your internet life and also your physical life as well. And that's exactly what we're trying to show here. And the very last one, and this is again a kind of neat IoT thing, talking about ubiquitous devices. And I'll show you this real quick before I pass it off to my colleague Leif. And this was about reminding people that APIs aren't just about, simple JSON structures of text all the time. Yeah, most of the time you do a get or a post or something like that, or maybe even a put, and you're sending back and forth query strings and maybe getting back JSON structures that are largely structured name value pairs and things like that, and such. But APIs can also be about things like streaming media, and so one of the neat demos we did was streaming a high resolution, like a 1080p video stream from a drone, and this was one of those quadcopters. It was a Phantom DJI that we were taking all this data from, streaming that data down and running it through one of the API gateways, because the API gateways can deal with all sorts of different media types, whether it's just text and JSON, or whether it's XML, or whether it's a 1080p video stream. I've actually had 4 of these things going simultaneously, running through a very, very anemic virtual gateway, and never had any problems with it. We probably could have run dozens of these things. It was very, very cool, very eye-catching, and so this is a great time to be in technology, because there's just so many interesting things going on, and this collision between things and our internet lives and the tools we have to begin to tie these things together certainly gets me very, very excited. So with that, I would like to pass off the baton to Leif Bildoy. And Leif has been with Layer 7 for a number of years, and CA Technologies as well. He's a product manager that knows all things mobile and has a tremendous perspective on where the industry is going and what's been happening. So with that, take it away, Leif.
All right, thanks, Scott. So let me see, I could even flip the slides here. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about exactly what the product here is doing, and we talked about simplifying the app access and so on, and the security layers. So we mentioned that we have a mobile version of the gateway, which has a bunch of extensions, and it also comes with a mobile SDK. And so what does it do, actually? So what you see right now is just the simplest of use cases, where you have some applications on the client side, and Scott mentioned this session sharing. We are always focused on tracking, if you like, 3 entities: the user, the apps, and the device. So we have tokens and signed cert for these things, and that is really what it is about. It's a thin token management layer, if you like, which the application developer can use when they're consuming these APIs. Because as you know, you see on the right side here a bunch of APIs, and there are some locks there. So the security architect would have essentially dressed up, a whole bunch of policies in describing how you can actually get access to these APIs, and the client developer, the application developer, is the guy that's going to decode that. So the convenience here is really the mobile SDK is the convenience for the app developer, so that you can actually consume these APIs in a secure fashion. And what is key is, of course, you don't want to obstruct the user experience, and that's a fine-grained balance, as we already mentioned. So key tasks of your mission here is, first, you need to authenticate the mobile user, and the mobile API gateway, or actually any gateway from Layer 7 will integrate to a whole bunch of different identity providers. And it could be your corporate identity store. It could be integration into social logins, if you want to offload that burden onto Google or Facebook and so on. And maybe that's not appropriate for your employees, but maybe it is very appropriate for your customers. They are likely these days to not want to generate new username passwords. So the capability here is, as I mentioned, you get an SSO across native and also now mobile web apps. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that particular bridge there in the next couple of slides. So what is important to keep in mind here is that we are moving in that direction that Scott laid out here, where we're talking about not only this simple use case of some apps on a device, but also this wider use case where there are multiple devices and sharing of sessions across these devices. And one of the things that we've done already to be ready for that is some enhancement on OAuth. We're calling out here simplify OAuth for developers. We've actually built a dynamic credentialing mechanism on top of OAuth 2.0, where we actually can provision truly unique identifiers for each application instance. And if you think about that demo, a couple of slides earlier here, where you have the same app running on 2 different devices, it is crucial that you're able to actually track these different instances if you're going to do this session sharing in a secure enough way. So what does this bring to your business? Well, all about mobile experiences. You know, just working, like functionally working, isn't good enough today. So you really need to delight your customers and your employees with a great mobile experience. And this is what this unified token management library, if you like, is doing for you. And by using this, of course, you accelerate your delivery of new mobile applications. So let's talk about web apps and native apps. And we mentioned already, you often end up in a siloed world. You already have some infrastructure. You have some probably SAML-based web SSO infrastructure. And what you could do, I mean, it was designed for using getting SSO on a desktop environment, and you could really use that on a mobile browser as well. There's nothing wrong with that. It might just be that the user experience isn't optimal because there's nothing mobile specific about it. On the other hand, you have, of course, the option of taking a modern approach, writing a native application. You may be using the MAG, the Mobile API Gateway, and SDK, but you're still there with your silo. You're signed into your web app in your native browser because that's a sandboxed environment, and you have these 2 or 3 other applications on your device, which you also sign into through the SDK. What you really want is that you sign in on the native app and you also appear signed in your browser app. So ideally, there would be some plugins to the browser. We all know that that's not the case, and there are probably very good reasons for exactly that there is no plugin model to the browser, and security is an important aspect here. So what we actually did then earlier in this year was to sit down and think about this. We want to achieve this great user experience, but it really looked like we had to write a custom browser, and now that's not the business that CA is in. So we were able to leverage the embedded browser APIs on the devices, and we essentially have an wrapping app, like it's another native app. We call it Enterprise Browser here, and it's just another app that is written against the SDK, and it has some other capabilities where it actually can render some JSON structures describing your existing web infrastructure, and they will appear as, for example, as a tiles, cards, if you like, and you're able to interact with those websites and appear as signed in a kind of transparent, automatic way. In reality, you're signing in once for all of this, and that will be with your enterprise credential. And in this case, you see here, I mean, this is based on actually some requirements that came internally in CA from our IT department. and where they really wanted this optimized user experience, and we of course had SiteMinder or CA SSO as it's called today, as the SAML infrastructure, web infrastructure here. And what we were able to do was to take the MAG, deploy it as a proxy to SiteMinder, as we continued writing applications, native applications, but most importantly, we were able to then externalize these other web applications. And on this slide, we show the one-axis, that's the name they picked for that, the one-axis app, as another proof point. So the key here is that your tiles, you're almost having like a viewer into your enterprise assets. So these tiles can be web applications, they can be native applications, doesn't matter. It's just a representation of your assets, and you see Salesforce there. You see a bunch of different travel apps and so on. These are the apps that CA is running internally, and I think the IT guys told me we have 100+ different applications, and you can imagine yourself, you know, what they look like on a mobile device. Some of them look really good, others don't. So when you're looking at mobilizing your app assets, you basically have a choice here. So you can either go and use web technologies and modify your website and your web app to render well on a mobile device, and I think Salesforce is probably a good example of that. But there are certainly other applications that you have in your infrastructure where it comes down to this choice, and you're going to say, hey, let's write a native app, and we only want maybe this, you know, a subset of the features. And so by using the MAG here, you have a tool for mobilizing your apps and providing easy access to all these applications. You're getting basically a unified SSO experience across native web apps and also PhoneGap, so hybrid apps. And this is something that we then productized in our latest release of the mobile API gateway. Let's see, and part of that SDK, you will have a sample, a reference design, which is not exactly the one-axis application, but having similar feature level, and that will be provided with the SDK. So you can build out this application and then go and integrate to this different SAML integrated web apps. And here we have a slide with another rendering of that same application. So basically not a tablet, but a phone. You could change, of course, the layout and so on this tiles as you like. But the key point is that we're already integrating into existing infrastructure here. So the mobile API gateway is about a lot more than just single sign-on. So it really is an integration engine. So we have called out here identity management. There's all different on-prem enterprise apps that you can integrate to, and not least these cloud services. And this becomes really your corporate standard for integration and mobilizing your applications and across different platforms and applications. And the key here is there's a lot of value in this. So your developer velocity or your time to market will improve quite radically. And one point I want to make out on this, I see the time we're coming up to the hour, is that we're providing a native security model for web applications, and that's very important. And it's a conscious decision we made with this approach, which was let's leverage all the the security primitives that the modern operating systems on the phone have today, and let web apps take part of that. So that should be the summary. We're basically helping our customers with productivity. We're applying this native security model, and we're actually doing that with agility. And agility is important for us. It's important for you. So I think that's about it, Scott.
Yeah, listen, thanks, Leif. That was really, really good. And I'm really, the thing I'm really excited about is the fact that, this is sort of that middle ground, between, legacy apps and the modern, custom app world. And this kind of brings all of that together and still creates a really, really good user experience, which is what we want in the end. So listen, everybody, we're up at the top of the hour. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time for questions and things like that. But here's what we'll do. Chat out questions and or, email them to either myself or Leif. My email address is scott.morrison, morrison @ca.com. So it's fairly easy. Leif is Leif Bildoy, Leif Bildoi. Oh, did I get that right, Leif? I'm not very good at yeah. And by all means, send us emails, questions, anything like that, and we'll do our best to answer. So thank you, everybody, again, and I hope the rest of your day ends up being good and productive. Take care and goodbye.